Ready to roll. All right, so welcome back. And also welcome new faces to the Tanya Tuesday. And the Tanya, the beautiful book, split up into many different parts. And what's exciting today is we're starting a new section of Tanya. So whether you've been along for the ride or not, or you forgot everything like I do, you will, today's discussion is going to be a lively one and a good one. And so let us just recap what we've discovered generally in the Tanya. Tanya has generally discussed the battle that wages within ourselves between our godly soul and our animalistic soul. And we understood that most of us will never be the fully righteous person. Fully righteous means someone who gets rid of their animalistic soul. Okay, we will be people who will be fighting our entire lives. We wanted to understand what is our purpose in life and why our soul came down to this earth. That was our last discussion. And of course, the answer is to make a home for God here on this earth. We'll actually discuss that more for those who want to review in JLI's class um, tomorrow. And really, as we explained in the classes in the last couple of weeks, there's really the question is from two sides. There's God's question and our question. But again, um, today we're changing discussions. Okay, so we're not discussing what is the purpose. Obviously, we know the general purpose is to make God a home on this earth. Um, Today's discussion is going to be very similar to last discussion because last discussion went on to a debate or discovery. What is more important, doing mitzvahs or studying Torah? And of course, the answer was is that there's something that each one has that the other one doesn't have. So today, the Tanya moves on to a very similar topic, but I find it very, very meaningful topic. It's a very important one, and that is what is more important, the intention or the deed? So I want to hear if anybody wants to make a case. You can put in the notes what you think. Intention versus deed. Um, Give us or you can unmute yourself, but you can put in the notes. Why would it's not to say one is better than the other, but give me your argument or your thoughts as to in the service of God, which one is primary or maybe not primary, but what's the benefit of one over the other, intention versus deed? Because this is a common um, issue I'd say we struggle with, right? There are times when we find it easy to have the intention, but follow through the action is difficult, and there are times where it's the other way around. The action is easy, the intention is difficult. Um, so if anyone has any thoughts, I'm all for hearing it. Um,
Yeah,
but it is yes.
I was gonna say, are you allowed to say both? Because without true intention,
Well,
like,
yeah, you're okay to say both. I just want to hear your argument as to each side. If that makes sense.
yeah, I think I mean, I guess I think it's both because if you don't have the right intention, but you still perform a deed, does it matter in that way? Like, if it's a mitzvah, like if you do it, like, are you doing it for the right intentions or just doing it to do it?
So basically you're asking if you do something without the intention, does it even count?
Yeah.
Good question. All right, question. Okay. Um, someone else here wrote. Let me take a look here. Um, we have. I think intention is good, but the actual deed is doing it and following through. But maybe Hashem gives you some credit for the thought, but you need to complete it. Okay. Um, okay. Deed to show you're serious. Okay. I guess that's a good example is if we want to go to marriage example, you know, how does that work out? You know, if you say tell your if you the example I've given before is one time there was a couple they were fighting, so they go to the therapist and the therapist realizes that the husband never gives his wife any gifts. She really was her love language. She really liked gifts. So the next morning she gets up and she sees in front of the house there's a big treasure chest, like you used to see at the dentist. And the husband says, here's all the gifts you ever want. So iPhones and car keys, just whenever you feel a need for a gift, just go in the chest and pull out the gift you want. And of course, that wasn't well appreciated, right? So you had a deed, but the intention is completely lacking, okay? Or you have the opposite way around, right? So you say, I really meant to throw you a birthday, but I got caught up at work, right? So that goes back to I think what Beth said is how serious are you if you can't follow through? Okay, so let me present this in a different manner. Present the question in a different manner. So let's think of like this. Imagine, uh, see, many of you don't have this problem. If you grow up religious, you can really do your prayers without any intention at all. I can literally rattle off the prayers and be somewhere else. Okay. Now you might have a mitzvah where you can do the same thing, where you can do it, where you've done it many times, and that's really a big problem that's spoken about. Is once you do something multiple times, then at some point it can become a habit, and a habit means you can do the deed without having any intention. Okay. Then let's give another scenario. Let's say someone shows up to synagogue and they cannot read. Let's say not Hebrew, not English. They can't read any of the prayers. And so they cry out to God from the depths of their heart and they call to God and God hears them. And in fact, there's a story of the Baal Shem Tov where someone came to synagogue and couldn't pray and cried out to God. And the Baal Shem Tov said, because of that person, all the decrees were annulled. So on the one hand, the person who reads the prayer might be fulfilling their obligation, and the person who is not saying the prayer is not fulfilling their obligation. So it's a hard balance. It's like we said, you really need both. Um, so first I want to talk about the question of if you don't have any intention, is your deed worth it at all? So the answer is it actually depends on the commandment, okay? Depends on the deed. So, for example, charity. It says charity, interestingly enough, if you are walking and you have a hole in your pocket and money falls out of your pocket and a poor person finds that money, you get the mitzvah of giving charity. Okay? It's an anomaly. Generally, you have to have at least intention that you are doing a mitzvah. Okay? But that just means you have intention you're doing a mitzvah. The actual intention of the mitzvah itself could be totally lacking. So let's just give a simple example. You light Shabbat candles. You know that lighting Shabbat candles is a mitzvah, but it's not meaningful. You don't feel connected. You're just doing it because someone asked you to do it, and you know that it's a mitzvah, or you're putting on tefillin, or you're saying a prayer. Whatever it is, we can do many different mitzvahs, and we can do them with a general intention, but not a specific intention. Meaning, I know it's a mitzvah, but I'm not feeling any connection at the moment. I'm not feeling any love, reverence to God at the moment. I just know it's what God wants, so I'm doing it. So, correct. Most mitzvahs, if you don't have a minimal level of intention, you are not going to fulfill your obligation. Okay? But that minimal level of intention is really very minimal. Okay? It's literally knowing that you're doing the mitzvah. But beyond that, so it can be totally a lifeless deed, kind of like that husband that gave his wife gifts, where it can be very lifeless. He knows he's supposed to give gifts, and he is giving her gifts, but there's no life inside of it. Okay, so that's the question that we have here, and obviously, I think we all know that the intention of a deed feels very good, right? The intentions feels good, and the action itself, not as much. Okay, it doesn't feel as much. Um, Now we know in the Torah, it tells us obviously to do both. Okay. The Torah, for example, says, uh, actually the verse that the entire Tanya is based off of, the verse, Beficha uvavavcha la'asoso, that in your mouth and in your heart to do it. Or we have the Shema prayer, V'ahavta et Hashem elokecha, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. Right? So clearly, intention is very much a part of um, intention is very much a part of uh, the Torah study. Okay, it's clearly very much there. Oh, 1 second, I lost this over here. Okay, so clearly intention is very much a part of Judaism, and it needs to be there. So let us take a look at now. Now, as far as prayer is concerned, okay, prayer. Can you pray? Okay, so we understand you could do a deed without intention, full intention. How about prayer? Because seemingly prayer is about connection to God. The answer is prayer also. The only parts of prayer you need to have intention to fulfill your obligation is the first verse of the Shema and the first section of the Amidah. All the rest, if you pray the entire prayers without really knowing what you're saying, just knowing that you're praying, you fulfill your obligation. Okay? Which is fascinating. So let's take a look here at some text from the Tanya, and there's a book. It's called The Practical Tanya. You could buy it, but I also share on here, and I must have missed the first page here. So I'll just give you. Okay, let's continue. Oh, okay. So he says like this in the beginning, which I don't have the screenshot of it, but he basically says in chapter 37, we learned that even mitzvahs performed through speech, such as Torah study and prayer, can be considered practical mitzvahs, which engage the body and the soul because moving lips constitute a concrete action. But according to this logic, the mitzvahs performed through speech appear to have something of a confused identity. What does he mean? Their practical component, moving the lips, elevates the animal soul and body, fulfilling the purpose of creation, whereas their mental and emotional component, understanding the Torah, connecting to God in prayer, does not. So again, in the following passage, Tanya suggests that this somewhat bizarre conclusion is supported by the point of Jewish law. So what he's saying, okay, he might have been confusing us. So, I'm not going to worry what he said in the beginning. That's commentary. But let's continue. Now, following everything that has been written above in chapter 37, we can further approach the ruling of Jewish law as prescribed in Talmud and halachic codes that meditation does not count as recitation. So the first thing you need to know, I already explained how a deed without intention counts. Now you need to know the other way around doesn't count. So meditation does not count as recitation. There's an old saying, right? The road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? So that's the idea. If you just have intentions and you don't have the actual action, you have not done anything. So we automatically understand to a certain extent, action is more important than intention. What do I mean? If you have action and no intention, you fulfill your obligation. If you have intention and no action, you have not done anything. Okay, so let's continue. Which means that if you read the Shema only in your thoughts and don't articulate the words in your mouth, so just imagine you're sitting there and you're thinking the words of the Shema, you shall love the Lord your God, and you're literally feeling love towards God. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. But you're not actually saying the words, you have not fulfilled your obligation. Even though you did not do so with all your powers of concentration, even though you did so with all your powers of concentration, nevertheless, you do not fulfill the basic requirement of the commandment to read the Shema, and you have to go back and read it again, enunciating the words. So imagine you sat there and you intended with your mind to connect to God. You said Shema, Yisrael, and you said the entire thing. Okay? And you had the intention. Then you're done, and you're done with the intention. Okay? And you realize you didn't say anything. Now you got to go back and repeat it. Okay. Okay, I see. So let's continue. The same law applies to Birkat Hamazon, grace after the meals, which is a biblical requirement, and with other blessings that are rabbinic law, which similarly must be verbalized in order to fulfill the mitzvah. And the same is the case with prayer, which must be verbalized, even though prayer is primarily the service of the heart. In other words, I can make the argument. What he's explaining here is like this. I can make the argument with matzah. Obviously, you have to eat the matzah, right? That makes sense. Mitzvah to eat matzah, but the mitzvahs of prayer, like blessings, seemingly, why is speaking it and that important, right? Seemingly, the main thing there is the intention, gratefulness, blessing God, feeling love to God in prayer, feeling connected to God. So the fact that even in prayer and blessings, if you don't say you don't feel your obligation, tells us that action is a very, very important component. Okay? So, as he explains, evidently, though alone without speech is not an acceptable form of worship in Jewish. Okay, sorry. Now we return to the reverse case, where the words were recited, but the thought was lacking. But if you articulate the words of Shema or prayer, though you are not attentive to what you are saying, you did fulfill the basic requirement of the mitzvah after the fact, meaning it's not the best way to do it, but you do fulfill it, and you do not need to go back and repeat the text. here he explains something interesting. Jewish law often expresses a preferable standard of observance and a minimally accepted standard, which should not be aimed for, but is legally acceptable once you have already done it. In this case, mindless words of Shema and prayer, though obviously not ideal, are considered acceptable after the fact. Obviously, God can stipulate how he wishes to be worshipped, and he could require worship through thought, speech, or action. That in itself does not pose a problem. What is confusing here is why in the midst of prayer, Shema and Torah study, the two components of thought and speech are bound by diametrically opposed laws. The speech is crucial and the thought is dispensable. Right? In other words, you would think it would be the opposite. In other words, I understand mitzvahs of action, you need to do the action, but a mitzvah, which is primarily based in our mind, shouldn't the mind be what wins out? Shouldn't we say the other way around? Shouldn't we say, ideally, you should think it and say it. But after the fact, thinking alone is enough. But no, it's the other way around. Why is it the other way around? Okay. Before answering the question, the Tanya first notes an exception, which I explained earlier, except the first verse of Shema and the first blessing of Amidah, as the Talmud states in the tractate Brachot, up until the point the mitzvahs involve correction, tension. This point on, the mitzvah is simply one of reading words aloud. So again, but that's a side point that I explained before. I explained that in Shema and the Amidah, the first line you have to know what you're saying. So here he's going to give an answer. So again, the question is, why is it in a mitzvah where clearly the main essence of the mitzvah is actually the feeling and the thoughts? How is it possible that even in such a mitzvah like prayer and blessings, that after the fact, intention is not good enough? I would think it should be the opposite way around. I would think the intention is the primary goal here, and therefore after the fact, if you skip the deed, the intention alone should be good enough. And by the way, just before I continue, this is such an important class because how many Jews do we hear say, I'm a Jew in my heart, right? I feel it in my heart. I don't need to do anything, right? It's a very common thing, and we can understand. We can empathize with it because we can look at people who do the right deeds, but they have no feeling, and we could say, "Oh yeah, you're much better, right?" But clearly, Jewish law says no. Clearly, Jewish law seems to be saying that you could have all the feelings in the world, but if there's no action, nothing's happened. Okay, so again, it's a very important, very, very important point that the feelings alone in our Yiddishkeit, in our Judaism, is not going to be enough. Okay, let us continue. So he's going to explain why is it that, okay, obviously, I asked the question at the beginning of the class, which one is more important? So everyone said we need to have both, right? So obviously we should have both. But after the fact, only one, you fulfill your obligation, and that's deed. Why? So here's going to give the answer. He says, that reason for the legal emphasis on speech and de-emphasis on thought is because the soul itself does not require fixing it all through mitzvahs. I'll say that again. The soul itself does not require fixing it all. This is something we explained previously, but it's okay. We're repeating it again, which means the reason why we came down to this earth was not to elevate our souls, because our souls were doing fine and they were happy in heaven. We came down to this earth to change this world. So if I am engaging only in soul activities, which is intention and thoughts and feelings, then I am not changing the world around me. And therefore, if there's a question in a deed, which one after the fact does anything at all, the answer is going to be action. Because the purpose why I came down to this earth was to do the action. Okay? Because the soul itself did not need anything. And the feelings are primarily affecting the soul. Now, we're going to explain how the feelings also affect the world, which is why you still should do them. Let's continue. Rather, the purpose of a mitzvah observance is to pull down God's light in order to fix the energizing animal soul and the body. So that's the purpose. The purpose is to fix the energizing soul and body. Let's continue. Therefore, it's crucial that the mitzvah involves the animal soul and body through actual words spoken by the soul, using the 5 organs of speech, which are throat, lips, palate, tongue, and teeth. And so this is obviously talking about a mitzvah that is primarily in the mouth, which is a mitzvah of blessings. Obviously, other mitzvahs will be other parts of the body. But let's continue. And the same is true with the practical commandments, which the animal soul performs through the body's other limbs. As we learned in chapter 37, even the mitzvahs of saying Shema, praying, and studying Torah are primarily elevated, aiming the body, and that's why Jewish law stipulates bodily involvement, moving lips, as an indispensable component. On the other hand, the more spiritual, mental, emotional components of the mitzvah are not legally crucial, since the soul does not require fixing at all. They are not the reason why you are here as a soul in a body. So it's a very simple point. If you are here as a soul in a body to elevate the world around you, then if you have not spoken any words or you've not done any action, then you have not lived up to your life's mission, and therefore automatically um, you'll need to you will need to start over. Just to bring this idea home in another way of a story. They tell the story. There's one time a community they had in front of them. They needed to hire a cantor for the high holidays, and they had two choices. One cantor was a cantor who could sing beautifully and awaken hearts, but not very observant. Okay. Then they had another cantor who did not have the best voice, but was very observant and very connected and had awe and fear of heaven. So they asked a famous rabbi, what should they do? So the rabbi said, if the purpose of prayer is to evoke your feelings of mercy on God, then you should get the one with a good voice. But if the purpose of prayer is to evoke God's mercy on you, then you have to get the person who has the fear of heaven, because that's the person who's going to, connect more with God. So that's really what this idea here is what's the purpose of the deed? Is it for me? If it was for me, then the intention would be the primary. But if the primary is the uh the primary is God, then automatically I need to start with the deed. Okay? Um just all right. So now we get to the next part. The next part is a very fascinating thought. The next part goes like this. What can I compare this dichotomy and this balance of intention and deed to? And that the answer is, and this is brought in different classical sources, and the Alter Rebbe is going to bring it down. And he says it's like the body and a soul. Okay, so the intention of any good deed, of any mitzvah, is the soul, and the deed is the body. Okay, so unfortunately, for those of us who have lost loved ones, we know that though we know that our loved ones live on, but it's helpful to know they're okay. But down here on this earth, it's very hard because we don't see them, right? We live here on this earth. It's very hard. And that's what happens when you have a soul without a body. There's nothing anchoring in this world. Conversely, you can have someone that has a body. You can have the body here without the soul, which is actually also what happens when people pass away. And again, there's pretty much nothing to go off of, right? So we see clearly how really the true answer is what's more important, intention or the deed? The answer is really both, right? If you think of it in terms of a body and a soul, then you really need both, right? That's why it's such a great depiction of the two. However, we can also understand why if you do something without much intention, only minimal intention, you still fulfill your obligation because you have a body, you have a small amount of soul. Okay, it's not a very necessarily a very great element of a soul, but you have a small amount of soul, so there's still something there. Whereas if you had just the intention to do a good deed, but you didn't do it, then you have nothing. Okay, just to give an example. Okay, in the spouse example. Okay, if you have that same husband. Okay, the presents at the door are still better than thinking about giving presents and never doing anything. Okay, it's still better because there's still something that the spouse can look at, that can touch in this world. You tell your spouse, "Well, I thought about it all day and I couldn't pick something." You might get away with that once or twice, but eventually it's like I gotta see some form of some form of trying. Okay. Now here's an interesting question though. Um, you know what? No, let's read this inside. Let's read this inside before I go further. Let's read this inside because I think it's such a great example. So he says like this. As we shall see, the emphasis on the practical components of the mitzvahs ought not to undermine in any way the value we attach to the mitzvahs' mental, emotional components, which are also a requirement of Jewish law. It's only that after the fact, a lack of attentiveness doesn't legally disqualify a mitzvah, as he explains. Nevertheless, all the above emphasis on the practical component of a mitzvah does not mean that attentiveness is unimportant. For it has been said, prayer or other blessings without attentiveness are like a body without a soul. The phrase "a body without a soul" seems at first glance to suggest a lifeless and death. But to say that a mitzvah without kavanah is dead and meaningless would contradict our entire discussion above. That even in the absence of attentiveness, there's great validity and significance to the mitzvah, right? So it cannot just be that a mitzvah without attention is entirely a body without a soul. The Tanya therefore offers a different interpretation, which means that just as all created beings in this world have a body and a soul, each having their own separate source of life energy from God, so too the practical deed of a mitzvah and its kavanah each have their own life energy. However, the life energy of the body is far less from the life energy of the soul. So let me explain what that means. We know when someone dies, even when their soul leaves their body doesn't just disappear, right? Yes, the body sticks around. How is that possible? The answer is because everything in this world, even rocks, have a life force from God. You can call it a soul, but everything in this world has a life force from God. So even a body from which the soul has left it still has some form of a soul, still has some form of energy from God. Okay? So with that in mind, let's say the life energy of a body without a soul is like the life energy of a rock. Okay? Now, it doesn't seem very alive. Now, it is alive. It exists here on this earth, and they do grow and shrink and whatever. But the life of a rock is nothing compared to the life of a human being, right? So the similarly is a mitzvah. A mitzvah, so let's put it this way. A mitzvah that's done without intention is like the life of a rock. Okay? It's alive, but it's not nothing like the life of a body. Okay? Whereas the life of a mitzvah with intention becomes like a body with life in it. Okay? So that's why energy, very good. So that's why we have this example. The example of a body and soul is not just to tell you it's lifeless, because it's not completely lifeless. It cannot be completely lifeless because otherwise it wouldn't be a mitzvah at all. Even a body has a certain life from God. Even when someone dies, the fact that the body sticks around means God is giving it life. But that life is so minuscule compared to the life of a living being that we look at it as we call it dead. That's why we call it dead. Let's someone says energy is another good word. Yes. Let's take a look here. The phrase like a body without a soul doesn't mean to say that the body is dead and lifeless. It means only that the body's own minimal life is present as opposed to the abundance of life energy found in a soul. So it's stuck with the life energy that a body itself has. To clarify this point, the Tanya will first illustrate how both the soul and the body have their own separate source of life in God. First, we have to demonstrate that the soul at all three levels is alive with spiritual citations. So I'm going to skip through this first part. For the soul is the nefesh. I'm just going to read it quickly. For the soul is the light nefesh of every living thing, and the ruach of every individual being, and the shum of everything that has a spirit of life in the nostrils, which includes all animals. This is saying is, if you want to get Kabbalistic, which we're not going to get too Kabbalistic, if you look, you know, if I were to ask you, what's the Hebrew word for soul? Most of you would say neshama, but there's actually different words used. There's the word nefesh. Nefesh is also used. You probably heard that. Maybe you heard the group that brings people to Israel called Nefesh B'Nefesh. So nefesh is another word for soul, and ruach is another word for soul. So that's because there's actually five levels of the soul. There's actually five names for the soul. Okay, those are the three general ones we use. So what he's pointing out here is that some things have only a nefesh, some things only have a ruach, some things only have a neshama. But those are different ways of saying what I just said, which is that everything has its own life force. Oh boy, there goes the baby. Um, that is to say, but don't worry, someone's here. So that is to say that every single being in this world has a life force, but they're not all equal. Some might have a very deep life force, and some have or energy, and some have a very minimal energy. As he says, God gives them all life, both the body and the soul, matter and the spirit, and he brings them into being continually. something from nothing, something we explained in chapter 20 and 21, and we'll explain in the second section of Tanya, but it's not for now, through his light and energy which he pours into them. Since even the physical body and even completely motionless stones and dirt contain light and energy from God. Otherwise, they would return to be null and void as they were once or. So that's how it works. Zoom is good. Okay, so that's how it works. So that's what he's saying. Even stones and dirt are alive in the sense that God's life energy must constantly be pumped into them to maintain their existence. And if stones and dirt have their own life force, then certainly the physical body does too. Nevertheless, there is simply no similarity or comparison at all between the divine light and the energy which shines in the body to the light and energy which shines in the soul. Since the soul is overtly alive, it's the life of every living thing. So the statement that a mitzvah without attentiveness is like a body without a soul means not that the mitzvah is dead or invalid, but that it's low in life energy like body and not high in life energy. So to recap, we've said that we start off with a question. The question is, if we do a mitzvah with, sorry, what's more important, intention or action? Well, at a very basic level, we could say that based on what we said till now, that action is more important. Why? Because at the end of the day, if you do the deed without the intention, at least you have a body which has a minuscule amount of life to it, and you fulfilled your obligation. Whereas if you do the intention without the action, um, you have not accomplished anything. Now, what we haven't discussed at length yet, really, is the real consequence of doing an action without the feeling. Okay, so we will expound on that more as time goes on. So don't think we're brushing the lack of intention under the rug. It's a very, very important piece. In fact, the whole Tanya is really about intention. It's about having feelings of love and awe to God. So to say that the Tanya does not place any emphasis on feeling and intention would not be true. It's just we have to develop these ideas from the two different sides. So we're first starting on the side of what is intention, sorry, what is action, sorry, what does intention without action look like? And the answer is nothing. You have not accomplished anything. It's beautiful, but you have not accomplished anything in this world, which is the reason why you came to this world, and therefore it doesn't count for anything. Whereas action without intention does count for something, because there is some life to that body, some life to that mitzvah, but it is very minuscule as we've gotten so far, and we haven't gotten the full ramifications of the fallout of not having intention. Obviously, we know it has not as great energy, but what exactly is lacking? We will explain it as we go further. Um, okay. Any questions or comments before I continue?
Yes, I wanted to ask you, can a person's intention simply be um getting to know God, getting close to God, and that's it? That's their only intention?
In the ideal world, the answer is no. That is actually what you said is the most basic layer of intention, to know that I am fulfilling God's will. See, it's hard to say that the answer is no because you said the word intention. The question is, we ideally want the intentions to also lead to a level of feeling as we will develop. See, that's the tricky part when I'm talking about intention. In other words, I haven't really exposed what intention means. So intention might just mean my thought process or it might mean my feelings. And so that's what the Tanya is going to develop is actually intention of a mitzvah should not be limited to our thoughts, but it should actually, in the most ideal form, go all the way to our feelings. So yeah, God wants all of it. Exactly. So to put it simply, yes, God wants we should serve him with our entire being. Okay. So that would mean not just to limit it to our mind, but to allow it to enter to our heart. And we've touched on this throughout the Tanya, but now we're taking it head on in a direct manner. Okay. We've just explained multiple times why intention is important. Number one, sorry, why feeling is important, because feelings, typically lead how we act, right? If we feel love towards God, we're more likely to do mitzvahs, right? It's the obvious thing. But here we're going to add another layer that not only that, but to fulfill a mitzvah in its full, complete form, the ideal way is to have feelings towards God, not just in the mind. Okay? Now he's going to say something that's very interesting. It's going to point out that how is it possible? How is it possible that the life force in a living person is more than the life force in a dead person if both of them have concealment of God's face? And the answer is, well, it depends how much concealment is. That's the answer. So let's read. In other words, we have to understand even when someone's alive, it's still not a full revelation of their godly soul. Okay? It's not. When they die, then in heaven you can see a full revelation of the godly soul. So really, truthfully, on this earth, we don't get a full revelation of the anything. But nevertheless, the revelation in a live person, the soul in that body, is much greater than the revelation of life not in that. So let's read it here. So he says, even though the body and the soul's light is one and the same, in the sense that both the body and the soul's light suffers equally from the hiding of God's face and filters, since God light is first hidden and dimmed, and only then is it received by them, since both body and soul are entities found in this world, so everything in this world has a diminishment of God's light, otherwise we wouldn't be able to have it in this world. And as a whole, this world conceals equally the light and energy from the breath of his mouth. So let's go to the next page. Through the hiding of God's face and the rung by rung downgrade of chain of the worlds, through numerous profound diminishments, if the Klipas Noga is a force that hides God, making our autonomous existence possible, how could it be powered from God? For this to happen, the divine light, the Klipas Noga, must be hidden and dimmed numerous times. It must be downgraded so that its energy can be compatible with the Klipa. This process of hiding and diminishment continues progressively until the divine light has been dimmed so much that it can be received by Klipas Noga to energize the overall infrastructure of this material world. Okay? So, he's just explaining he's just explaining what we've said earlier, that everything in this world has to have a diminishment, because Klipas Noga is the energy of all permissible and ritual purely things in this world, and it is from this Klipa Noga energy that and through its agency that the energy then flows to impure things. Since as stated above, he's repeating things that are kind of tangential, so that's why I'm just reading through it quickly, and if you don't catch it, it's fine. But it looks like I didn't take a picture of the next page, never as we get so far. So what are we, page 437? So, but again, his point here is that even though everything in this earth is, even though everything on this earth suffers from a diminishment of God's light, nevertheless, it's not all created equal. Okay, it's not all. There's gradations of, which is another important word that we use a lot. There's gradations. Okay, there's gradations of concealment. That goes back to another discussion we had about different souls. Why some people are more spiritual than others. When our soul came into this earth, how much concealment did our soul get? Okay, that's the question. So some people got more concealment than others, therefore they feel naturally less spiritual. In our essence, we're all the same, but there's gradations of how much concealment happened to us. Let's continue. He's going at length on the different levels of God hiding. It's for those who want to go deep into the Kabbalah. We're getting to the practical idea. I continues. Nevertheless, despite the fact that everything in this world suffers from the same hiding of God's face, the light, which is the flow of energy that God shines through the filter of this world to provide with energy, is not the same in all recipients, because it differs in the extent of diminishment in some cases and more manifestation in other cases. So he's just saying what I said, which is, and I said it because I read it though, it's not because I'm smarter. Lest you think I figured it out. Okay, but he's saying what I said. So what he's saying is that sorry, what he's saying is that in this world, sure, everything is hidden, it has a concealment from God. Nothing in this earth has a full revelation from God until Mashiach comes. But nevertheless, there's a difference in the different areas of life. And now he's going to bring the example from the four general layers of life in this world. So what are the four layers of life that exist in this world? Anybody knows? What are the four layers of life? let me put it, let me back up, right? If we're talking about, right, life, God's energy being present is a greater manifestation of godliness. So there are four different layers of life in this earth that are really different manifestations of God's energy, with the highest one being the greatest manifestation of God's energy. Okay, so what are the four layers of life that exist here on this earth? Any thoughts?
Can you give a hint?
Well,
Are
can
birth
someone pick
and
one?
death,
Huh?
are birth and death two of them?
Okay, I'll start with one. It's categories. So there's human beings. Human being is one layer of life. Okay,
Death?
that's where you have, huh?
Did someone say death? Did someone else say death?
Right, yeah, yeah. So again, my question may not have been clear. So the first layer of life, where you see a revelation of godliness, so to speak, in life in this world, is the life that is present in human beings, is the highest revelation of life that exists on this earth. So what's the next layer below that? Here you can guess. Animals.
Animal.
Good. Okay, Lyle has it all here in the bottom. All right, the layer under human beings is animals. It's another layer of life, though not the same as human beings. Then under animals comes plant life, and then under plant life comes the elements, or inanimate, or rocks, stones, minerals, earth, that layer. So those are four layers of life that exist on this earth, and they're all alive. As we said, they're all alive, but their level of life force is different. And that's dependent on how much God diminishes and hides his light here on this earth. So let us continue. So this is what he's going to say inside. Okay, and that's the same thing. So we understand that the life form in the body is like the lowest one. It's like the rocks and the stones. Okay, the body without the soul. That's what I mean. For in the soulless physical body, as well as completely motionless objects such as rocks and dust, there's a very diminished light, unparalleled in fact in the levels and so on. So think about it. Your body is alive, but it's like as alive as a rock. Okay? And the energy there is so minuscule that these objects do not even have the power of vegetative growth present in the plant kingdom. While in the plant kingdom, the divine light is not as greatly diminished as it is with motionless objects. The hierarchy of non-living and living organisms, motionless objects, plants, animals, and humans represent the progressive weaker symptom, which means concealment of God. The higher the life form, the more divine light and energy is present, and the weaker the diminishment, the symptom. And generally speaking, the presence of the divine light and energy in the physical world is divided into four levels: motionless objects, plants, animals, and humans. Fascinating enough, he says, corresponding to the four letters of God's blessed name, from where the light and energy flows. So God's name has four letters, right? The Yud, K, Vav, K, right? So the letter Yud is for human beings, the letter Hey is for animals, the letter Vav is for vegetation, and the last letter Hey is for inanimate objects. Okay. Now I feel like I should begin this next part before we end, because I feel like yeah, we'll finish this off, okay? Because I don't like to end off without talking about the flip side, about the intention. Okay. So we can't get fully into it, but we'll get somewhat into it. Okay. Um Now he says, just as there is no similarity in comparison between the light energy flow into a motionless object in plants, which is like a body without a soul, does not show overt signs of energetic life, when contrasted to the light energy flow received by animals and humans, which, like a body with a soul, do show overt signs of energetic life, even though, as we learned above, all four of them have the same light in terms of hiding of God's face, meaning they all have a concealment of God's face, but nevertheless some have more than others. And they all share the same filter, which is the filter, right? They all have the same filter, but it just depends how big the filter is. So just as the overt energy of objects and plants compared to human animals differs radically, likewise, there is no similarity or comparison at all between the light flow of the blessed infinite light, which is God's inner will without any hiding of face or filter at all. So let's read this. And I should have said it outside first. That shines into and enters the purely physical components of the practical mitzvah, the physical deed itself devoid of attentiveness, as well as the physical components of the verbally observed mitzvahs and other verbal expressions devoid of attentiveness, which as above are counted as actual deeds, and the level of blessed infinite light in these mindless deeds is minuscule contrasted to the superior light flow of blessed infinite light, which shines and flows in kavanah and tenderness accompanied in practical mitzvahs. I read it quick. Don't worry, it was too quick. So let me explain what he said out loud. What he said is like this. The difference between a mitzvah with intention and a mitzvah without intention is like the difference between the life of a human being and the life of a rock. Okay, now earlier we said it's like the difference between a body and a soul, but another way of saying that is between a human being and a rock. So think about it. Your mitzvah that you do without any intention is about as lively as a rock. All right, that's something to think about, before we do a mitzvah without having any feelings or intention towards God at all. It's got the divine energy of a rock. It's there, it's right there, but it's very weighed down, which is going to be the discussion we're going to have later, actually, which is this idea that a mitzvah without intention is like heavy. It doesn't go up to heaven. It's there, we did it, but it's not so connected. We'll get to it later. So this is our choice. So again, I said we started off showing how if you do a mitzvah, if you have the intention without the feeling, then you haven't done anything. We said you gotta have the deed. But now we're saying, but you should know. Don't think you're off the hook just by doing the deed, because if you do the deed alone without the intention, your mitzvah is as lively as a rock. Okay, your mitzvah is as lively as a rock, which is not a great place to be, right? It's not a great place to be. Again, these are ideas we're gonna develop. We're gonna develop further as we continue on. But next week we're gonna delve further into, which is the next section, which is what does intention actually look like. That was we had some questions earlier in the class, and I started to talk about it, but we'll get into it more. But and again, this is a section of Tanya that takes 3 chapters, chapter 38, 39, and 40. So like everything we do here in Tanya, it's going to be in depth. Okay, so we're going to in depth get into what does it mean to have intention, and really delve even deeper into what a mitzvah without intention, how bad it is. Is there any way to correct it? Is there any way to elevate it? Those are all discussions we're going to have. But this is such a powerful part of our life that we need to know it. And so he started off laying the foundation. The basic foundation is you cannot, of course, just have feelings in the heart. Okay? That's the first thing he says outright. Feelings in the heart, you've not fulfilled your obligation. Why? Because you're here on this earth to do the mitzvah here on this earth. The feelings are more soul activities. Okay? So he had to lay that foundation before we even got into this conversation. You have to at least do the deed. So in the question, what's more important, deed or action? Well, you have to do the deed. Now the question is, what happens when I do the deed without the intention? And that's where he's going to continuously pound on us, that though Jewish law says the deed without the intention, you fulfill your obligation, do not think for a second that should ever be your goal. And he's going to pound the pavement, so to speak, multiple times, just how problematic it is to do a mitzvah without intention. And his first layer of that is just imagine your mitzvah without intention as the difference between a rock and a living human being. So that's his first layer, and we'll develop this more and more as we continue on in the next weeks. So thank you for coming, and I look forward to continuing this journey next week. And if you're available to come tomorrow night to class, we'll be on a similar topic, but a different reframe and a little obviously less text-based, a little easier on the head, but a really deep, thoughtful discussion as well, but a related discussion. So thank you all for coming, and I'll stick around for questions.
Yes, Bella. Yes.